It's been 7 years since 19-year-old Morgan Bauer went missing, just days after moving to Georgia from South Dakota. Nearly a decade later, investigators now say they've tracked down two suspects responsible for her death and disappearance.
There's lots of unanswered questions. Really, they could have met this victim by happenstance, right? It truly could be that.
Former FBI and CIA agent Tracy Walder says there are still many question marks in the case of Morgan Bauer. What we do know, suspects Jonathan Alexander Warren and Caitlin Goebel have been charged in connection to her disappearance.
The male, I believe, has the murder charge. The female has more, concealing evidence, tampering with evidence. So it sounds like he may have ultimately, murdered whomever, and then she helped him cover it up. That's how I read those charges.
Bauer was last seen in February 2016 in Newton County, Georgia, about 40 minutes outside of Atlanta. According to her mother, Bauer had started working at a strip club in Gainesville, Georgia, a few days prior, after moving to the area from South Dakota. Following her disappearance, her mother told news outlets Bauer moved to Georgia with only $20 and planned to live with roommates she met via Craigslist. In late July of this year, investigators said new information led to a search warrant in Porterdale, Georgia, where a home was searched. Around this same time, investigators announced they received multiple tips into Bauer's disappearance.
So I think that's what's interesting, is that this tip just sort of like manifested, I guess, if you will. And it's my understanding that they were the last people to have been in contact with her. So what I am surprised about, and I'm almost always very pro law enforcement, obviously I am former law enforcement, is that, 2016 to now, yes, that is 7 years, but in terms of technology speaking, it's not that long of a period of time. There would have been cameras at this club that I think they were all at last. And I'm surprised that wasn't, I guess, picked up on beforehand, because it's my understanding they hadn't really ever been brought in for questioning prior.
Walder believes it's this tip that led to major movement in Bauer's case. She says the time length between Bauer's disappearance and the suspect's arrests is worth noting.
Maybe these individuals were interviewed at some point. I don't know. But you know what? Typically, when you are investigating a disappearance or a murder, you always want to start backwards, right? Who was the last person that they were seen alive with? You don't start at the death. You start at the last known proof of life, I guess. And so I would have guessed that they would have been spoken to, and it wouldn't have been all that difficult to identify them if indeed this club had cameras and those kinds of things, which were around in 2016, right? This isn't, 1985. So I'm thinking it was this tip.
In early August, investigators announced Warren was arrested in Los Angeles, California, while Goebel was arrested in Peoria, Illinois.
It was GBI, Georgia Bureau of Investigations, that found it. And so I find that fascinating as well. So were these individuals on vacation? That's because clearly when they entered the home, they've recently found things that are of evidentiary value. That's what they've said. And so it has to be a home that they are currently occupying and that other people are not necessarily occupying. Maybe they have tenants in there and they've ruled out those tenants. I don't know. However, the house, for them to have been arrested in two different geographic locations, 7 years from when this disappearance occurred, it had to have ultimately come back to them living in that home at that period of time when this evidence would have been of value.
Investigators say something of evidentiary value was recovered that led to the arrests, but have not specified what. Walder says there are several possibilities.
This sounds silly, but textile. So clothing, bits of whatever she maybe had left last on. I know her mom said that she had given her something to keep safe. The last time she saw her, maybe that was found and identified, through her mom. Bloodstains, those last. We like to think that they don't, but they do. Tissue, bodily matter, bones, all those kinds of things could have been found and then ultimately, could be traced back. Again, they're not saying that Morgan Bauer is is deceased. But those are all things of evidentiary value that could have been found.
Warren now faces charges of murder, aggravated assault, concealing death, and tampering with evidence. Goebel is charged with concealing death and tampering with evidence. It's still unclear how the pair are connected to Bauer.
There's lots of unanswered questions. Really, they could have met this victim by happenstance, right? It truly could be that. Or, this was someone that they did know through social media or those kinds of things. I'm sure all of that has been looked at. And if they had a connection to her through social media, I would have imagined that they would have been on the police's radar earlier, simply because they most likely had access to all of Morgan's accounts.
Though Warren is charged with Bauer's murder, investigators have not yet confirmed how she was killed or whether a body has been recovered. Walder says possible clues helped investigators reach that conclusion.
My guess is they have probably identified whomever is there, and that's why they're able to tack on those murder charges. Also, you can look if there's blood at the scene, and it is not enough and it's too much, for a person to still be alive without amount of blood loss. Then you can detail, that the person has been killed. But again, you'd have to have his hands on that person or his hands on that murder weapon. So my guess is they've most likely found some kind of a murder weapon. They most likely have found his DNA attached to whomever the victim was. And that's probably why he has this murder charge.
In a statement on the Missing Morgan Facebook page, Bauer's mother wrote in part, quote, "Legally and currently, Morgan is still considered a missing person. While we are so grateful that arrests have been made, this is an ongoing investigation. We must move moment by moment. We do not want to risk harming her case or misinformation being shared." As to why it took so long for an arrest in Bauer's case, Walder says there are many possibilities.
Either there's just not enough evidence. Maybe these individuals were on their radar screen for a long time and there was not enough evidence at all. Or this tip was called in and it led them to the home, and then that provided the mountain of evidence that they needed.
Right now, the investigation is still ongoing. It's unclear when Warren and Goebel will be extradited to Georgia to face charges. Reporting for Law&Crime Network, I'm Sierra Gillespie.